Humanity was labeled as loud, emotional, and desperate. We were the beggars of the cosmos, forever pleading for a seat at the table of the great and ancient. But when the void finally pressed its teeth against our throat, the posturing stopped. There were no screams. There were no frantic pleas for mercy. We simply stood up, packed our heavy hearts into our ships, and left the galaxy to burn in the silence we left behind. The Grand Forum was a monument to hesitation. It was a cavernous, sprawling amphitheater carved into the hollowed-out asteroid that served as the capital of the Galactic Council. Tiered balconies of polished stone rose hundreds of feet into the artificial atmosphere. It smelled of ozone, filtered oxygen, and the sterile perfume of 50 different alien biospheres forced into coexistence. Samuel Hayes hated the smell. It smelled like waiting. He sat in the human delegation pod, a cramped, steel-paneled booth situated near the upper rim. Down below, on the central floor, the tally board flickered. A massive obsidian monolith displayed the voting record in real time. Red lights cascaded down its surface like a waterfall of blood. Red meant no. Red meant denial. "They're stalling," Eleanor Trent whispered. She was his chief tactician, a woman whose face was mapped with the stress lines of 1,000 failed negotiations. Her fingers flew across the glass of her datapad. "Oliver is moving to push the motion to a subcommittee. They want a century-long feasibility study on the socio-economic impacts of military intervention." "They aren't stalling, Eleanor," Samuel said. His voice was entirely flat. The microphone on his desk was muted. "They've already made their peace with our dead. On the edge of human space, the Orion Cygnus arm was burning. A biomechanical swarm the Council designated simply as the Convergence had breached the outer perimeter 3 weeks ago. They didn't conquer. They didn't negotiate. They dismantled planets down to their mantle, harvesting the core heat and moving on. 7 human colony worlds were already gone. 4 billion lives. And the Council was debating the socio-economic impact of sending the reserve fleets. Down on the floor, the Council speaker raised his gavel. The speaker belonged to a mantis-like species, draped in iridescent silk, who had adopted the diplomatic moniker of Oliver to put human diplomats at ease. The gesture had always felt patronizing. Now, it just felt sick. "The chair recognizes the delicate nature of the Terran situation," Oliver's voice echoed through the translation matrix in Samuel's earpiece. The voice was synthesized, perfectly modulated to project calm. "However, the Galactic Charter explicitly forbids the mobilization of the Vanguard fleet without a comprehensive threat assessment. To rush our forces into an unknown anomaly would be a dereliction of our duty to the greater galaxy." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the thousands of delegates. Soft, polite, cowardly agreement. William, the human military attaché sitting to Samuel's left, gripped the edge of the desk. His knuckles turned stark white. An anomaly? They ate Harvest 4 in 6 hours. They cracked the crust and drank the oceans. What more of an assessment do they need? "They need it to hit someone else first," Samuel replied. He didn't look at William. He didn't look at Eleanor. He kept his eyes fixed on the monolithic board. The final votes were locking in. The resolution to provide immediate military aid to the Sol Alliance was defeated. 73% opposed. The human pod was utterly silent. For a decade, humanity had played the game. They had paid their exorbitant tariffs. They had provided the raw labor force that built the outer rings of the Citadel. They had bled their own soldiers, policing the chaotic pirate sectors that the Council races were too civilized to enter. They had been the loud, boisterous, eager newcomers, desperate to prove their worth to a galaxy that looked down on them as violent upstarts. "Ambassador Hayes," Oliver's synthesized voice boomed, directed up at the human pod. The spotlight shifted, illuminating the cramped booth. "The Council extends its deepest sympathies to your colonies. We will immediately authorize a relief fund of 2 billion credits for refugee relocation, pending an audit." 100 cameras focused on Samuel. The rest of the forum braced themselves. They expected the usual human response. They expected Samuel to slam his fists on the desk. They expected him to yell, to curse, to invoke morality and justice. They were ready to look upon him with pitying, superior eyes as he threw a very public, very emotional tantrum. Samuel looked down at the floor. He didn't reach for the microphone. He didn't glare. Slowly, he reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal suit. He pulled out a battered, silver pocket watch, an antique from a world that felt very far away. He checked the time. He snapped it shut. The metallic click was barely picked up by the ambient sensors, but it sounded like a gunshot to the humans in the booth. He turned to Eleanor. "Execute Protocol Exodus." Eleanor didn't hesitate. She didn't ask if he was sure. The time for diplomacy had died exactly 3 minutes ago. She pressed her thumb to the biometric scanner on her datapad and swiped upward. A silent, encrypted ping bounced from the delegation booth to the human communications relay orbiting the Citadel. From there, it fragmented into 80,000 individual messages, delivered instantly to every Terran citizen within the sector. Samuel stood up. He buttoned his jacket. "Pack up the core," Samuel ordered quietly. "Wipe the drives. We leave nothing behind." The first to leave was Mason. Deep in the bowels of the Citadel, Sector 4 Freight Bay was a cacophony of groaning metal and shouting foremen. Mason, a heavy loader operator, was midway through shifting a 60-ton crate of refined zero-point fuel. His neural link chimed. A single red icon appeared in his peripheral vision. Exodus. Mason didn't sigh. He didn't curse. He simply took his hands off the control yoke. The massive crane halted, the 60-ton crate dangling precariously in midair. "Hey, Ape!" His supervisor, a multi-limbed avian alien, squawked through the comms. "What are you doing? Drop the cargo in Bay 7! Mason reached up and unclipped his company ID badge. He tossed it onto the dashboard. He popped the hatch of the loader, climbed down the ladder, and started walking toward the transit tubes. "I will dock your pay. I will have you expelled from the guild," the supervisor shrieked, flapping his primary arms in agitation. Mason didn't even look back. All around the massive freight bay, the grinding roar of heavy machinery was slowly dying. Dozens of human operators were stopping their rigs. They were dropping their tools. Wands of welding torches were left burning on workbenches. The air grew eerily, unnaturally quiet. 3 levels up, in the Citadel's primary medical wing, Dr. Grace Miller was scrubbing out of surgery. She had just spent 4 hours repairing the shattered carapace of a Valen diplomat. Her datapad buzzed in her locker. She opened it, saw the red icon, and stopped drying her hands. The alien head nurse approached, holding a stack of post-op charts. "Dr. Miller, we have 3 more queued for the trauma ward. Minor orbital fractures." Grace took off her white coat. She folded it neatly and placed it on the bench. "Cancel my rotation," Grace said softly. She picked up her civilian jacket. "Cancel? You cannot cancel a rotation, Doctor." "Your contract." "I'm resigning," Grace said. She didn't offer an apology. Her eyes were empty, focused on a point 1,000 light-years away. She walked past the nurse, joining a sudden stream of human medical staff. Nurses, technicians, orderlies, all moving in the same direction. All moving in complete silence. Back in the Grand Forum, the atmosphere was shifting from smug satisfaction to profound confusion. Samuel Hayes was still standing. William was systematically unplugging the encrypted data drives from the console. slotting them into a shielded briefcase. Eleanor was wiping the local memory banks, her screen flashing with deletion confirmations. The holographic flag of the United Nations, which had projected a proud, rotating globe above their pod for a decade, suddenly flickered and vanished. "Ambassador Hayes," Oliver said, the synthesized voice losing a fraction of its perfect modulation. "What is the meaning of this?" "You have not been dismissed." Samuel picked up his briefcase. He looked down at the speaker. He finally reached over and tapped the microphone button. "We are done," Samuel said. His voice didn't boom. It didn't shake. It was a cold, lifeless transmission that echoed across the vast chamber. "Done?" Oliver repeated, his mandibles clicking in visible irritation. "You are throwing a tantrum, Ambassador. The Council has ruled. You cannot simply walk out of a galactic proceeding because you did not get your way." "We aren't walking out of a proceeding, Speaker," Samuel replied. "We are walking out of the Citadel." A murmur of laughter drifted from a few of the surrounding pods. The idea was absurd. Humanity had fought tooth and nail for this real estate. They had sacrificed trade fleets and colonies just to afford the upkeep on their sector of the station. "Do not be theatrical, Samuel," Oliver scoffed. "If you leave this chamber, you forfeit your speaking rights for the remainder of the cycle." "Keep them," Samuel said. He turned and walked out of the pod. Eleanor and William followed. They didn't look back. They didn't storm out in a rage. They simply walked away, their footsteps echoing heavily on the metal grates. By the time Samuel reached the main promenade outside the forum, the true scale of protocol exodus was beginning to manifest. The promenade, usually a bustling artery of interspecies commerce, was in a state of localized gridlock. Thousands of humans were marching toward the docking rings. There was no panic. There was no stampede. It was a mass migration executed with terrifying militaristic precision. Mechanics with grease still on their hands, diplomats in tailored suits, security contractors carrying heavy pulse rifles, walking in tight, disciplined formations. Alien security forces stood by, paralyzed. They gripped their stun batons, unsure of what to do. There was no riot to suppress. There was no violence. It was just a silent, unstoppable river of humanity leaving. Oliver intercepted Samuel at the entrance to Docking Ring Prime. The speaker had abandoned his podium, flanked by two towering Citadel guards. For the first time, the alien looked unsettled. His silk robes fluttered as he stepped into Samuel's path. "Hayes, stop this," Oliver demanded. "My aides are telling me the lower engineering decks are abandoned. The fusion regulators are unmonitored. The human auxiliary fleets are detaching from the defense grid. This is a breach of 1,000 treaties." "Take it up with the courts," Samuel said, stepping around him. Oliver sidestepped, blocking him again. "You are leaving us utterly defenseless. The pirate syndicates in the Outer Rim will notice the grid is down. The Citadel cannot run without your engineering core." Samuel stopped. He looked at the alien, really looked at him. There was no anger left in Samuel's eyes, just the terrifying void of a man who had realized he was speaking to a ghost. "You voted for a study," Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "So study this. We asked you for help to save our home. You told us our home wasn't worth the cost of fuel. It is politics, Samuel. It is the way of the galaxy. Not anymore." Samuel leaned in slightly. "We are going home. Every human ship, every gun, every drop of blood we have left is going to the frontier to hold the line against the convergence. We aren't going to beg you to fight with us. But understand this, Speaker." Samuel looked past Oliver, gesturing to the massive armored human dreadnoughts visible through the viewport. They were unspooling from the Citadel's moorings, their engines flaring with brutal, unrefined power. "If we fall, the swarm will come here. And when they start cracking your planet's crust, when they start drinking your oceans, there won't be any humans left to stand in front of you." Samuel adjusted his grip on his briefcase. "Good luck with your subcommittee." He walked past the speaker, joining the silent stream of humanity filing into the transport ships. Oliver stood frozen in the promenade, watching them go. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Citadel was entirely quiet. And in that silence, the Galactic Council finally understood what terror felt like. 17 days after the human fleet vanished into the slipstream, the Citadel's artificial daylight flickered and died in Sector 9. It did not come back on. Oliver stood by the expansive crystalline window of the speaker's spire, looking down at the sprawling galactic capital. Sector 9 was a residential zone, primarily housing the aquatic Xylarali delegates. Now, it was a black void against the glowing lattice of the station. Maintenance crews, or what was left of them, reported that the localized fusion stabilizers had tripped. Resetting them required a manual bypass deep in the irradiated coolant tunnels, a job humans had done for a decade, a job humans had unionized, regulated, and quietly managed while the Council debated trade tariffs on exotic spices. "Have the engineering guilds deployed a repair team?" Oliver asked. His synthesized voice clipped, the translation matrix struggling to mask his biological stress pheromones. General Vorek, a hulking reptilian quadruped, draped in the heavy gold braiding of the Vanguard Command, shifted uncomfortably on his front claws. "The guilds refuse. They cite lethal radiation levels. They are demanding specialized atmospheric diving suits." "Then procure the suits." The suits were manufactured by Terran industrial contractors. "Speaker," Vorek replied, his deep voice rumbling in his throat. "The blueprints went with them. The factories in the outer ring are empty husks. The workers took the proprietary fabricators." Oliver closed his eyes. The mantis-like alien rubbed his segmented mandibles together. It wasn't just Sector 9. It was a creeping, systemic rot. The humans hadn't just comprised the military auxiliary. They were the plumbers, the heavy lifters, the hazardous waste technicians. They were the gristle and bone that held the gleaming, delicate flesh of the Council together. For centuries, the older species of the galaxy had evolved past manual labor. They were philosophers, artists, theoretical physicists, and politicians. When humanity arrived, loud, desperate, and endlessly energetic, the Council had gladly handed them the mop and the rifle, sneering at their primitive eagerness to get their hands dirty. Now, the Citadel was drowning in its own refuse. The door to the speaker's chambers hissed open. A junior aide skittered in, data slate trembling in its manipulator appendages. "Speaker Oliver, General, we have an urgent telemetry ping from the Outer Rim listening posts. The Viridian Syndicate." Vorek scoffed. "Pirates. Let the local sector police handle it." "The sector police are dead, General," the aide said softly. The Syndicate realized the human auxiliary patrol fleets were gone. They bypassed the trade lanes entirely. They hit the orbital refineries over Kalen Prime 3 hours ago. The local garrison surrendered without firing a shot. Oliver turned away from the window. Kalen Prime was a core world. It supplied 60% of the Vanguard fleet's munitions. "Deploy the 3rd Vanguard Flotilla," Oliver ordered, a cold dread pooling in his thorax. "Crush them. Make an example." Vorek hesitated. "Speaker, the 3rd Flotilla relies on human heavy dreadnoughts to anchor their formations. Our cruisers are designed for fast strikes, not sustained bombardments, without Terran shields to draw fire." "I said deploy them, General," Oliver snarled, slamming a serrated fist onto his glass desk. "Are we the masters of this galaxy, or are we helpless fledglings crying for a human nanny? Send the fleet, and bring me eyes on the Sol sector. I want to know exactly how fast the convergence is slaughtering them." The Council got their wish 4 days later. Deep in the Grand Forum, the atmosphere was entirely different from the day Samuel Hayes had walked out. The chamber was packed, not with bickering politicians, but with terrified delegates clinging to silence. The massive obsidian monolith in the center of the room, once used for voting tallies, was now live-streaming a feed from a cloaked deep space probe stationed at the edge of human territory. They expected to see the end of a species. They expected to watch human worlds crack and burn, validating their decision to withhold aid. It would be a tragedy, of course. They would draft a beautiful, poetic resolution, mourning the loss of the loud, ambitious apes. What the probe transmitted instead defied their comprehension. The convergence was vast. It was not a fleet in the traditional sense, but a churning, biomechanical cloud of harvesting machines, geometric leviathans, and world crackers that blotted out the stars. It moved like a plague of locusts, entirely devoid of tactical formations. It simply overwhelmed through sheer mass. Standing in their path was the Saul Alliance. There were no grand speeches broadcasting on open channels. There was no desperate plea for aid. The human comms were completely encrypted, silent to the watching galaxy. By the ancestors, Vorek whispered, standing beside Oliver's podium. Humanity had stripped their own worlds bare. The Council watched in horrified awe as massive, hastily retrofitted civilian freighters, ships designed to carry grain and ore, drifted in the vanguard. They had been gutted. Their cargo holds were packed with unstable dark matter cores, stripped from their own planetary power grids. The convergent swarm advanced, millions of biomechanical drones accelerating toward the human lines. The freighters didn't fire. They didn't retreat. They simply accelerated. Thousands of human volunteer pilots drove their jury-rigged bombs directly into the throat of the swarm. The Council watched as the first freighter collided with a convergence harvester. The resulting dark matter detonation didn't just destroy the ship. It tore a temporary hole in the fabric of space-time. A silent, blinding flash of violet energy expanded outward, annihilating thousands of alien drones in a microsecond. Then another flash, and another. The humans were not fighting a war of attrition. They were fighting a war of absolute, unhinged annihilation. "They are destroying their own infrastructure," Oliver whispered, his compound eyes wide. "Those cores, that is the energy supply for their entire outer colonies. They will freeze in the dark." "They don't care," Vorek replied grimly. "They are making sure there is nothing left for the swarm to harvest." The human dreadnoughts moved in behind the detonation wave. They didn't use the elegant, precise energy weapons the Council favored. They used mass drivers, brutal, primitive kinetic weapons scaled up to apocalyptic proportions. They hurled solid slugs of depleted uranium at a fraction of the speed of light. The recoil shattered the spines of their own ships, but the slugs tore through the armored hides of the convergence leviathans like wet paper. It was ugly. It was costly. The Council watched human ships vent atmosphere, listing lazily into the void, only to redirect their thrusters and ram the nearest enemy vessel. There was no grace in the human defense. There was only a terrifying, mechanical efficiency born of absolute malice. They fought like a cornered predator that had already accepted its own death, intent only on dragging the hunter down to hell with it. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, the command deck vibrating violently as the main batteries cycled for another volley. The air smelled of copper wire, sweat, and burning ozone. "Shields are down to 19%, the tactical officer called out. His voice was hoarse. He had been screaming coordinates for 36 hours straight. "We have multiple hull breaches on decks 4 through 9. Automated bulkheads are holding, but we are bleeding atmosphere." Cole didn't flinch. He gripped the tactical railing, his eyes locked on the holographic projection of the battle space. The convergence was slowing. For the first time since they had entered the galaxy, The biomechanical swarm was stalling. They operated on a basic algorithmic imperative: expend energy to consume more energy. Humanity was making the equation mathematically unviable. Reroute life support from the lower decks to the forward kinetic batteries, Cole ordered. Sir, the engineering officer hesitated. We still have damage control teams down there. They know their jobs, Lieutenant. Reroute the power. Cole watched the projection as the retribution fired again. A spear of solid metal crossed the void, impacting a massive, geometric command node at the center of the swarm. The node fractured, bleeding a thick, luminous blue fluid into the vacuum of space. Direct hit, Tactical reported. Enemy node is losing structural integrity. Swarm cohesion in Sector 4 is degrading. In a small observation booth at the rear of the bridge, Samuel Hayes watched the carnage. He still wore the charcoal suit he had worn at the Citadel, though it was now wrinkled, the collar unbuttoned, the tie discarded. He looked exhausted. He looked older. But as he watched the alien armada splinter under the relentless, suicidal pressure of the human fleet, a grim sense of peace settled over him. He activated his secure comms channel, patching directly to Eleanor, who was coordinating the evacuation transports on the far side of the system. Status of the civilian flotilla? Samuel asked. 80% jumped to the Magellanic waypoint. Eleanor's voice crackled back, thick with static. We are loading the last of the agricultural domes from Mars now. It's close, Sam. The swarm's flanking tendrils are chewing through the asteroid defenses. Tell them to burn their engines to slag if they have to. Just get them out. Samuel cut the feed. He looked back at the main screen. The human fleet was dying. It was a mathematical certainty. They had traded 3 ships for every one of the enemy's Leviathans, but the swarm simply had more mass. Yet, they had accomplished their primary objective. They had bled the convergence. They had fractured their command network, forcing the hive mind to experience a concept it had never encountered in its eons of consumption. Fear. Back on the Citadel, the Grand Forum was entirely silent. The live feed showed the smoldering ruins of the Sol Alliance frontier. Debris fields the size of small planets clogged the shipping lanes. The convergence was retreating. It was a slow, disorganized withdrawal. The swarm had calculated the caloric cost of consuming the human worlds, weighed it against the sheer, unmitigated violence required to take them, and determined the prey was too toxic to eat. The humans had held the line, but as the alien delegates watched the feed, a sickening realization washed over the chamber. Oliver stared at the monolith. His mandibles were perfectly still. General Vorek stood beside him, the great reptilian warrior trembling. The human fleet was severely depleted. Hundreds of their heavy dreadnoughts were reduced to drifting, burning husks. But the ships that survived didn't stand down. They didn't broadcast victory channels. They did not open communications with the Council to demand recognition or aid. The surviving Terran ships simply regrouped. They formed a tight, heavily armored phalanx amidst the wreckage of their own border. They turned their colossal mass-driver cannons away from the retreating convergence swarm. They turned their guns toward the Citadel's warp gates. "Speaker," Vorek said, his voice entirely devoid of its usual booming authority. It sounded like the rasp of a dying man. "We have received a tight beam transmission. It is an automated beacon from the Terran flagship." "Play it," Oliver ordered, his legs suddenly weak. The audio filled the cavernous amphitheater. It wasn't Samuel Hayes. It wasn't a diplomat. It was a synthetic, automated broadcast repeating on a loop. "Warning. You have reached the sovereign territory of the Sol Alliance. This border is closed. Any vessel crossing this threshold, military or civilian, will be classified as a hostile entity and fired upon immediately. You have abandoned us to the dark. Do not expect to walk in our light. Warning. You have reached the sovereign territory. Oliver slumped back against his podium. The translation matrix in his earpiece clicked silently. The Galactic Council had wanted to study the socio-economic impacts of the human situation. Now, the results of their study were staring them in the face. They had not just lost their workforce. They had not just lost their shield. They had forged their own executioners and locked the door from the outside. In the ensuing silence, an aide rushed onto the floor. Speaker Oliver, Vanguard Command is reporting multiple warp signatures breaching the inner ring. The Viridian Syndicate has bypassed the third flotilla. They are in orbit. Oliver didn't answer. He just looked at the monolithic screen, at the burning, silent wall of human ships that would never, ever come to save them again. If this tale of humanity's silent defiance sent chills down your spine, do not just scroll past. Hit that like button to show the algorithm we stand united. Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another HFY epic. What would you have done in Samuel's shoes? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. Your active support keeps these stories alive, helping us bring more thrilling sci-fi universes directly to your screen. Stay strong,